This is a presentation on community-based alternatives for nonviolent juvenile offenders by Anessa Pennington. On any given day in the United States, about 50,000 youth are held in juvenile facilities. The majority of those youth that are incarcerated are held for nonviolent or status offenses, things like drug possession, theft, or even meeting an appointment with their probation officer. The Prison Policy Initiative said in 2018 that 1 in 3 could be released today without a great risk to society. So the average recidivism rate across the United States is about 55%. So that means that over half of juvenile offenders will commit another offense or have contact with police. So the cost of incarceration in a residential facility varies for states, but for the average kid, it can be around $30,000. So if a juvenile commits another offense and they have to go back to prison, then that's another 30 grand for just one kid. There's also disproportionate representation of minorities in the juvenile justice system in the United States. Black youth are incarcerated 5 times more than white youth and 3 times more than Hispanic youth. So there are a lot of mental health concerns when you consider prisons. For starters, a lot of juvenile offenders do have traumatic backgrounds, whether from abuse that they've received themselves or from witnessing violence in their neighborhoods. However, prison can also be an instigator for mental illness and trauma itself. 2/3 of boys and 75% of girls in prison meet the criteria for at least one psychiatric disorder. Rape in prison is also a major issue, and it's also present in juvenile prisons, where 1 in 10 offenders are sexually victimized, and that can be by another inmate or even a worker at a juvenile facility. One practice that has been deemed approaching torture by the United Nations is solitary confinement, where you can put someone in a really small room for hours, days, even weeks. And while 29 states have banned solitary confinement, there are still 21 states that have not and use it with little to no regulation. So because of the negative impacts of prison and its ineffectiveness in reducing recidivism, people have looked to community-based programs to rehabilitate offenders. And so instead of going to prison, juvenile offenders can stay in their own homes, go to their own schools, while also participating in rehabilitative programs that can help them gain skills and improve their behavior and even have better relationships with their parents. So we're going to look at a few of the programs, some that are more popular and some that are still in their infancy as far as research goes. Multisystemic therapy is probably the most popular community-based program in the United States. It recognizes that juvenile crime is a multifaceted issue, and so they could be juveniles are impacted by things that happen at school, at home, in their neighborhoods, and with their friends. And so this is an intensive therapeutic approach that kind of creates an individualized plan for juvenile offenders to really kind of pinpoint these stressor points that might cause youth to recidivate. And so here's the outcomes on recidivism for one of the sources in my literature review. And you can notice that although not all of these outcomes were significant, the MST group had kind of more positive outcomes than did the comparison group. So parenting with love and limits is another popular approach. This is used in 16 US states and Holland, and it was designed for youth with serious emotional and behavioral problems. This approach also recognizes the importance of family and having strong parenting skills and relationships with their kids. So the outcomes for parenting with love and limits have been generally positive, with the ability to reduce recidivism and improve behavior. However, sometimes the results aren't significant and the recidivism rates aren't that big of a difference. But parenting with love and limits costs about $4,000 to $5,000 per child, whereas a residential placement costs about 35 grand, at least in Florida, where one of these studies was done. So I really love this quote from one of the studies. At a cost savings of roughly $30,000, exploring the use of PLL for appropriate juvenile offenders would appear financially prudent, even if the recidivism rates were equal for PLL and residential completers. One of the studies I found talked about a Shakespeare-based program where offenders go to like an after-school meeting during the weekdays for about 10 weeks, and they prepare and direct and perform in a Shakespearean play. Here's a quote from one of the students where she's talking about how surprised she was that her mom wanted to come and see her, and how she kind of felt happy about that. And I think giving the youth opportunities to perform shows them contributing in positive ways rather than just being seen as criminals or delinquents. Another program was a Harry Potter based program where they believed that Harry Potter novels could teach virtuous behavior. However, some students, because of the harsh things that were going on in their reality, had a hard time connecting with fantasy. I read a study about this prevention program for Native Hawaiians, and I think it really speaks to the importance of creating programs that are culturally competent and giving juvenile offenders a space to think critically about the systems of power and how structural inequality plays a role in crime. This program had youth contributing to a 5-acre farm and attending educational trainings. And by the end, a lot of the youth felt more committed to doing good in their community. So this slide contains some of the limitations and recommendations for future research. The most important thing I think the future research needs to look at is expanding community-based programs to violent offenders in addition to nonviolent offenders, and also working to meet the needs of girls and minorities that are disproportionately represented in the juvenile justice system.